Hello, welcome to the podcast on the main channel. It's existed for years now over on my second channel, but less people subscribe there. And I want to make sure the biggest audience possible is able to see it. So here it is. It's much different than normal YouTube videos that I create. Each one is about an hour long. I have, amazing guests, like the people that I want to talk to the most in the industry. I've been so grateful to have them on the show in the past. And this episode is no exception. I've got Alex Lindsay. I've looked up to him for so long, has so much wisdom in both the production and Apple universe. So I hope you guys enjoy the show. And if you want to see older episodes, again, still check out the second channel. I'm not sure how I'm going to organize all this in the long run. We'll see if it makes sense. But since YouTube now supports podcasts, this is what I'm going to try for now. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the episode. I have a repeat guest. Alex Lindsay is back. Thanks for joining me again.
Glad to be here.
I mostly know you from MacBreak Weekly, which you've been doing for a long time now. And you were always the voice of what do professionals really think, which is sometimes a hard opinion to find access to. A lot of the sort of tech media will come at it from the perspective of a writer or, just a internet personality, but you do big productions that require a lot of gear. And so your opinion has always been very valuable.
Thanks. I think it's you can't be very, I guess, when you're in production, a lot of times it's hard to be idealistic. I like to call it, I tend to call it being a practical perfectionist, which is that you're always trying to make it better. You're always trying to get to that next thing. You're always looking to kind of keep on making it going down the path. But you understand that this is where we are right now.
Right. Yeah.
This is what we need, to do this right now. We can't, it's not all going to be perfect.
And sometimes without overcomplicating your setup too. I've got this is kind of the back and forth I've done with even how I do this podcast. Of sometimes I'm like, you know what, the video quality doesn't matter. I'm just going to focus on the audio. And then I look at the video after one of those episodes. I'm like, I can make it better. And then I add a whole bunch of external cameras and complicated. And it's always just going back and forth between the gear versus the content. And it's a struggle.
Yeah, I have a very hard time with that. I keep on changing cameras, so I keep on increasing the quality of the camera, and so that's the kind of the constant challenge that I have. But yeah, my whole set is kind of in chaos. I mean, it doesn't move super fast, but it's constantly moving. I'm adding a couple more things here and a couple more things there, and the hard part is, every day I'm on with other people that are doing the same thing. And so all of us just keep pushing each other very gently forward. Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh, what is he using there? What is she doing there? And I was like, I got to try that. And then next thing you know, you spend another $1,000. So.
Well, and to give people that aren't familiar with you a sense of what you do outside of when you're talking on the internet, what kind of productions are you working on? What sort of setups do you usually work with?
Yeah. So I mostly manage, my job is mostly as a fixer. I go in and fix things that aren't quite working quite right. And usually I would say that what I do in my job is mostly that I replace complex solutions with simple solutions that do complex things. So how do we simplify everything so that it's more predictable, and how do we make that work? And inside of that, I do a lot of live events. Right now, I'm mostly doing live activations to theaters. So when I do live, I'm mostly thinking not so much about the internet. I do that for my own shows, but for my job, I'm mostly thinking about theater distribution. So it's how do we send over fiber or over the internet to multiple theaters or multiple venues, a live experience, and then tie the viewers back in and so on and so forth. So that's mostly what I'm working on.
Cool. Well, some of the things I wanted to go over today, starting with the M3 family of chips, and your perspective using them, if you have yet, I'm not sure, but I've had my hands on the M3 Max and I haven't made anything to talk about it yet. I've just been kind of testing it and using it and pushing it, but this is my first chance really to go over what it's been like. And I think before going to my specific model, I just want to talk a bit about there feels like there's been this shift in the relationship of the M3 family between the base model, the Pro, and the Max. It's not the same as what we had with nothing's been the same. M1, M2, M3, we haven't found a predictable rhythm. Each time the sort of what to expect about release schedules or performance relative to each other is shifting. But this time, what I've really found to be the biggest shift is kind of the relationship between, what does Pro mean? What does Max mean? And it's just been kind of surprising. Have you had a chance to use any of them? Or?
I haven't used any of them yet. I'm a heavy desktop user, but not an iMac user. And so I really haven't needed to move up. I've never really I haven't gotten review copies hardware from Apple for a long time, and so I buy what I need. And right now, what I have are a Mac Studio and a stack of Mac Minis that I use on my desk for what I do. And so I'm not I don't travel enough post COVID to warrant getting a really powerful laptop. So I still have an Intel laptop. It's like my last Intel machine is my laptop
Wow.
because I mean, I don't even,
Yeah.
because it's, because I turn it on. It's like all I do is use it for office hours in the morning and maybe to check a couple things.
Right.
But I mostly, I don't, and I usually my travel is usually a day or two. Like it's not, I used to be gone for 6 weeks and I'd have to do all the production that I needed to do. And so I always had a laptop and I worried about it. And I just don't use laptops very much anymore. And so it's just the connectivity is difficult. And again, I have a desk that I'm in most days, and it's got a lot of power that's built into it, and so I don't worry about it as much. I really love the Mac Minis and the Studios. The Mac Studio I haven't, or the Mac Pro, I haven't really justified yet. Like I don't know what I would do with that yet. For what I do right now.
Right.
So it's not. I haven't had something to pay for it, I guess is the bottom line. And then the iMac, I go, oh, that'd be really good to buy for my parents or my parents-in-law or something like that. But I don't, or my kids maybe. But I haven't really needed one yet on my end. And so, because I really love the problem that I have, it's hard to, I don't have a good wide shot to show here, but I've got 8 monitors, or usually it's 6 to 8 monitors, but I have more screens available to me, than I have monitors.
Yep.
And so I have a router that I'm routing back. I'm routing stuff to my mixer or my switcher and my screens and everything else. And I think that generates a certain lifestyle, which is that I really like Mac Minis and stuff because I just stack them up.
Hmm.
And then I have my studio that I work on, and I don't have to. I'm trying to figure out what I would do with a laptop is half the problem. Like where would I put it?
Well,
Because I have kind of a whole workstation,
if
workspace
let's
here.
just say that the M3 Studio had been updated at this point, would what you've seen in processor gains, would that be tempting enough to upgrade?
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
which one are you on with the Studio? Is it M1?
I'm on the Max, the M2,
Yeah.
the first one, whatever came out. I mean, I bought the Studio as it was being released as a uh as the Max version, not the Ultra version.
Right.
So I stayed one behind. I do find it weird that I know that Apple has a reason for this, but I do think it's weird that they're releasing the laptops and the iMacs before the Studio and the Pro. Like it cognitively, I'm like, the high performance machine should get the high performance chips first.
Yeah, you expect
And then
the
you let
features to
them,
like trickle down, not trickle
yeah,
up.
not
That's not
up.
really a thing.
And it's just
Yeah.
weird. Like I haven't seen anybody test it against their Pro, and I haven't tested it against my Mac Studio. But I feel like if I had a laptop that was going faster than the Mac Studio, I feel like I'm back in the 90s, because that's what happened in the 90s, which was that the G3 was suddenly, the laptops were suddenly faster than the 604s. The 603s were faster because they had a bigger L2 cache, and that made them faster than the G4 in almost every way. So you had laptops that were faster than desktops, and the whole thing felt inverted. And that's what I feel like we're in right now, is that Apple somehow is inverting this. And I think it's just the way that their manufacturing works and everything else. But I feel like they're going to have to sync that up at some point where they get back to that TikTok.
Well, yeah, I haven't verified it entirely myself yet. I've done a few tests, but based on everything I've been seeing, it's looking like, the M3 Max is outperforming the M2 Ultra in certain situations, like certain
Yeah.
multi-core processes. It's doing better than the best desktop you can buy right now, which is just such a strange situation to be in. And,
Yeah.
it's like for the most part, this MacBook Pro release like leveled out the choices for the laptops. I think it's a little easier to
Mhm.
choose, but it really confuses things now comparing it to the desktops. It's that like it, yeah, definitely
Yeah,
strange.
and I'm excited. I mean, I will say that I'm excited that the chips are doing so well. That the chips are interesting. That they are. It's exciting that that Apple has gone on to this new path where they're not contained by Intel's ability to move forward, and they have an architecture. And the advantage of this architecture is stunning, because when you own the programming platform, when you own the hardware and the software, the ability to create integration is just stunning. And I don't think there's not really been any company that's ever really been in that position where they were doing the operating system, the programming environment, the hardware, everything about it is all tied together. And that gives Apple an incredible, I mean, it's like it's like a Krupp's Arms vertical integration that really gives them a superpower. So I think I'm really excited about where they're going. I just think that this one part of it is like, I don't understand like why we don't get the new Pro versions of things. And I'm not in a rush. I'm kind of glad that they're not doing that because I'm saving up my money for a Vision,
Right,
Vision
right. You got
Pro.
enough.
And so I'm like,
coming
it's
up.
really good for them not to put anything out until June because I'll take the money that I saved and spend it on a headset. So
It was just on the Petapixel podcast talking about cameras and things, but one of the conversations we had there was about, is there still a reason to purchase PCs? And I'm starting to get to the point where, of course, desktops, there are all sorts of applications that will always make sense with a big tower, lots of power, lots of GPUs. But for laptops or anything portable, if you don't specifically need Windows, the actual machines don't. I can't justify it anymore for anyone. It doesn't make sense.
I get so under $500. So these are like these little quieter threes or quieter twos, quieter three, I guess is the one. This is this one. And so this is a little PC. And as a little like utility knife, this isn't a bad PC to have. I got a couple of these that I kind of use as glue, to tie things together, to jump into Zoom in after hours or to do other things like that. And then below that, of course, is like Raspberry Pis, and below that is Arduinos. And then you have the Mac, and the Mac starts for me at about $500 or $600, and it goes all the way up to 12,000. Like that's all. I have a very hard, unless I need a specific application, I have a hard time excusing buying anything between the 500 to 12,000 range. Over that, I need multiple GPUs. I need NVIDIA. I need, whatever those things are. That makes sense. Like to me, PCs make sense at those levels because you just can't scale the Mac to what some of those can do.
Yeah. What use cases do you still find for a built-out PC? Like what? Because I always try to put myself in an imaginary position of, oh, I know there are people that do this. 3D is an obvious one, but in the world of just like more video production or live, when does it still make sense to build out a tower?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're looking at, where we have built them out in the past where we couldn't get a Mac is when we're stitching like 360s or 180s, we're stitching all that live. We've got 6 cameras coming in, we're running a stitch across all of those, and those all have to be tied together. We might even be adding graphics to that. We might be flowing data into those things, and you need multiple. We needed up to 4 GPUs just to make the thing run, and even those were on fire, busy, to make that actually happen. And so those are one place. Another place is with photogrammetry, you can do it on the Mac. The more hardware you add to it, the faster it goes. And some of the photogrammetry stuff I've done has taken days to calculate. So reducing that from days down to 6 hours or 3 hours of processing power makes a difference. When you get into, so those, and some real-time, there's some real-time stuff that you might want to do that wants to be, multi-screen, multi-background, but still integrated into one machine. So those are some other areas that I think are still a PC world that we go, oh, I can't do that on the Mac right now. And some of it has to do with software, but a lot of it has to do with multiple GPUs, and specifically multiple NVIDIA cards. NVIDIA's got a lot of subsystems that people have written to. So the NVIDIA cards are really the thing that probably pulls us towards the PCs more than Apple will never support those. And so we've given up the idea of let's argue with Apple about supporting the NVIDIA cards. Yeah. That's not going to happen.
Well, yeah. And that reminds me, actually, let's circle back eventually to both photogrammetry and also like, Gaussian splats, is that the new word for them? And Nerfs and
Nerfs or Gaussian splats, whatever you want to call them.
I'd love to chat about that a bit more afterwards. But directly, what I've actually been testing lately, which again, this is the review unit from Apple. They sent me the M3 Max with everything, and I mean so far the most exciting thing so far, I think, might be the fact that it has 128 gigs of RAM, which I don't know if I'd pull that trigger myself. It's incredibly expensive. But once it's there becomes this feeling of invincibility where you can just keep everything open all the time. And what I keep running into in each of my reviews, I'm like, well, I need to find more and more aggressive tests that are still realistic in the real world that actually might slow this down. And the one that I'm still running into, the one it hasn't been able to pass, that's pretty common, is running noise removal and some kind of grain emulation as well at the same time.
Right.
Those both continue to slow it down so that
Well,
it's slower than
and
real
also
time.
rendering. I mean, if you
Right.
render
Can always
3D,
go
you're going to
faster.
run into, global illumination. There's no, we joke that it's, when you render for film, generally the accepted number is 45 minutes a frame. Like 45 minutes a frame, and you just keep the frames keep getting more and more detailed. But if
Right.
you look back at Toy Story, I think it was actually Toy Story might have been a little bit more, but there was some time in the 90s where it became like 45 minutes a frame is something we see often. And as the hardware got better, it didn't become 30 minutes a frame or 15 minutes a frame. We just kept on adding things into it until it was back to 45 minutes a frame on average. Then, now we're, getting these incredible images that come out of it. But we just keep on throwing it at the hardware. And then again, the photogrammetry, I can probably send you, remind me and I'll send you a file.
Well, this is something I've been trying to sort out from Apple's sort of their pitch to me, right? When they show the demos at their events, they're like, look at this Redshift render and how great you can do all these 3D things. And now there's more Octane Sport and all this stuff. I don't actually do that work. And I always wonder, does anybody choose a Mac for it? I mean, it looks great that it will go that much faster, but won't it always still go faster?
There's a lot of designers there's a lot of designers that would prefer a Mac. Like they just like Macs better, so they grew up through that and then they want to use it. They could go to a PC to do those things. And I think Apple needs to kind of keep breaking that down a little bit to make that more available. And so, but I think the there are definitely designers that use Mac everywhere else other than their workstation, and they don't like necessarily using a PC for that part. But Apple would have to prove that it makes a difference. And I think that some companies are really good at optimizing for that. So like Maxon is pushing Cinema 4D pretty hard as far as like how to take full advantage of the libraries that Apple's providing, as well as companies like Blackmagic and Resolve, really looking at how do they optimize for the hardware.
Right.
And that's where, so I think you're seeing some more of that. And I think as Apple, there's some point where I think Intel has a hard time, that everyone's now looking at ARM, but the problem they're going to have with ARM is that they're getting into it now because Apple is, cleaning their clocks in a lot of ways as far as price per watt and price per dollar is starting to become problematic for them. The hard part is that without owning the hardware manufacture and design, the operating system, the development environment,
how can they do it?
As well as it's very, very hard to make this work. This is a really hard problem. And what's interesting about it is that Apple takes the thing that was their disadvantage, which is that they're not working with everybody, and makes it their advantage. This plays to this idea that we should own everything in that process, and all the way up to the edge where you start adding the applications.
If you ever see Jared from Red do live streams, which he occasionally does, these very candid live streams on YouTube. This one I was watching when he was talking about developing the hydrogen phone, right? The Red was going to build a phone, if anybody forgets, with what would be effectively like a red camera in something that holds, oh, hey, and you just happen to have one. I've never seen one in person.
There it is.
I mean,
there it is. I love this phone. This is my favorite phone that was ever made. Although it's kind of out along in the tooth now, but it's a stereo phone, and it really does stereo. Like it does good stereo, and it was just so imaginative. And I love the fact, and it had this great, this little connector, the smart connector at the bottom. I don't know if my smart connector on the bottom that never turned into anything, but we were excited.
No, I love that they tried.
I love the idea. I loved what they did here. I loved, I bought it the day of, I bought the platinum one. Is that
the good one?
I can't remember. The titanium, I think, or platinum or whatever they called it. I bought this one, and then it was late, so they sent me another one, the regular one, which I think I gave to Andy Anako, and then I got this one, and I took pictures with it all the time, and now I'm excited about the Apple platform, the iPhone 15. But I've been shooting with this one. I was shooting with it for years, just because I love stereo.
Well,
I love stereo.
What he was saying in the live stream that was so kind of revealing is he's like, we know how to build great cameras, and of course they do. Like Red has done it. Their sensors are wonderful. Everybody knows how good they are. And they're like, we thought we could do the same thing for phones and just brute force it with great hardware. And he's like, we just underestimated how much that Apple integration was actually doing to take pretty mediocre hardware, because the Apple sensor, the Sony sensors in an iPhone are not where the Red sensor is, and just pull everything together in these magical ways that even, a world-class camera company like Red couldn't match it. Even though like
I mean,
top of the line Red camera can beat the quality of an iPhone, they couldn't figure out how to have that, end-to-end
well,
integration.
and the hard part is that, like, I don't know, 10 years ago when 60 Minutes did some tour of Apple, they came out with there's 200 engineers working on the camera. That was 10 years ago when
Right.
we weren't sure that cameras mattered, like how much they mattered. But the bottom line is everyone's making their decision about what kind of camera. Like, we were listening to all the iPhone launch. Everyone's just listening for, yeah. What are the specs on the new camera? Like, what are we going to get on the new
Yeah,
camera?
absolutely.
And that's all anybody waits for. And then you go, okay, I'll decide to buy it or not based on whether the camera is enough of a jump from wherever I am now. Because we have to remember that an iPhone 15 is not selling to the iPhone 14. Well, it is for me, but it's not normally for normal people. It's not selling to an iPhone 14 owner. It's selling to an iPhone 12 or 11 or 10,
Yeah.
of them getting to a precipice where they go, okay, it's time to upgrade. And the 15 is really nice, by the way.
Well, let's talk a lot about that in about 10 seconds. One more thing I want to hit on the laptop that I think is somewhat misunderstood. So I want to emphasize it a little bit, is that the display is mostly the same. And I think most people have perceived that the new MacBook Pros have the same display as before, because I think the hardware inside might be. But what it's doing now is that the SDR display is 20% brighter. So it's offering 600 nits in just like standard viewing. And I think people spend a lot of time focusing on those HDR numbers because it's the high number, right? It's peak brightness. This is when you're watching HDR content. There's more impact from the SDR brightness than the HDR. Like it's what you experience day to day. Can you sit outside and use your computer? Can you crank it up high enough to see what's going on? The same thing goes for when you buy on-camera monitors, right? Like if you want something that you're going to use outside, you don't care about peak brightness. It needs to stay 2000 nits for a few hours. So I just want to kind of drive home something I've seen missed overall, that bump in SDR brightness is actually really quite nice. I've had it sitting next to the M1 MacBook Pro, and you can absolutely see it. And if we keep getting those little incremental bumps to the standard brightness level, that I would take more of it. I really appreciate it.
Well, and I'm just amazed. I still have to admit that to go to the phone again is just because I don't have the new laptop, but I can say from the phone perspective, I'm just amazed at the brightness, the unbelievable images. You take a photo and it's kind of like you take the photo and then it pops up on your photos and it looks dark for a second and then it goes, oh, here's bright, and it just looks amazing.
Have you tried any of the?
I cannot believe I'm shooting this with a phone.
HDMI monitoring through the iPad, like the Orion app that came out recently.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just want that on the phone so badly, and I know it's a restriction in somewhere in iOS. Sebastian Twitz mentioned that they can't do it yet. But once that app hits and everybody can use an iPhone through HDMI as a monitor, I don't know if small HD is going to sell a lot of monitors. Like, I'm going to be using it all the time. The hard part is just
being willing to give up your phone.
I'd just buy more phones.
What was funny was I was going to give back my iPhone 14. And the problem is I'm still using it too much on other things, like a little extra camera and a little extra thing. And I'm like, oh, I'm never going to give this up. Like I've never given up. I haven't given up an iPhone since I bought one. Like they just slowly die and the battery gets to a point where they're not useful. But I use them I've got an iPhone 8 that's like a clock that's up here that it just tells me what time it is, and it's just, they slowly just kind of wind their way down into some version of usefulness. So
this is something we already talked about a lot because I came on your show recently, Office Hours, and we went through every single detail of the Shot on iPhone Apple event. And I feel like we didn't even scratch the surface even in an hour of that.
Yeah, we ran out of time. We were just like, okay, well, we got to it. And they just put out another ad with another behind the scenes. I was going to say, hey, you got to come back on because
let's talk about the future of it. Like, I want to figure out, or I think I want to, tease out the story of what will this actually be, because it's easy to see like, okay, well, the video looks good, but the conversation in my comment section anyway is usually, okay, sure, it looks better than it used to, but when is a filmmaker ever going to choose an iPhone over an Alexa or a Red? They're not. They're going to choose the big camera every single time. So this doesn't even matter.
Maybe.
Which, I don't agree with, but I want to know your take on that.
The Creator. Did you see The Creator?
I didn't watch it yet, but I am aware.
FX3,
Yeah.
not even an FX6. Like he shot, like Gareth Edwards did an FX3, and you see the behind the scenes. And here's what I noticed watching, and it's not perfect, by the way. So when you watch the movie, there are things that I can see, that I can tell you that it looks that way because they shot it on an FX3. They don't have the data there. They had to push it, and now I see a bunch of grain. You know, like there are times when it's not like nice grain, like digital grain. There's a couple shots that I was just like, ooh, that didn't work. You know, and so there was but for the most part, it works really well. And the thing that he talked about, I mean, some of it might have been budgetary, but what he talked about related to that was the freedom it gives you. You see a bunch of shots of him shooting on an RS2. I think it was an RS2 or RS3. You know, so he's got Ronins there that he's using for that instead of a Steadicam operator. You know, that he can control. Like he doesn't know how. I mean, I don't think he's a Steadicam operator. My brother is. So my brother will tell you
it's a real skill.
Yeah, and so my brother will tell you all the things you can do with a Steadicam that are really hard to do with a Ronin. And but he but the thing is it lets him decide that as the director. There's things that he can just grab onto and shoot the way he wants to shoot it, and it's not complex, and it's really small, and it's on these little rigs, and it gives him a certain level of freedom. I can see where, and I've started to shoot some footage on my. I mean, I shot 14 minutes of my daughter. My daughter just started playing in a band. She was playing at a local venue, and she's playing drums, and I shot 14 minutes of it. I was like, holy smokes, it's a 38 gig file. Like it was a huge file, and I opened it up, and it looks really nice. You know, it's a really nice shot. And I was kind of amazed that I shot that with my phone, and it started to get me going, and of like, where would I shoot this? And we are already, like, for instance, that behind the scenes, I think that whole launch for the Mac Pros and everything else, Apple in the past has oftentimes just made those like a press release. I personally think that a big part of that launch was a commercial for the iPhone.
Yeah,
we want to show you, like, more than anything else, we want to show you that we can shoot a keynote with an iPhone.
I mean, that's what most of my coverage was afterwards. Like
everyone forgot about that.
Exactly. I released like, multiple videos about this, and not as many. I know. I mean, it is huge news.
Well, and within a week, I was starting to get questions. We work with a lot of film partners. I was getting questions from film companies of, if we shoot this interview with an iPhone 15, what are the specs? And I gave them back. I was like, well, we'd really like to see 4K, you know, like 4K. And if you can do 60, you know, 24, it's okay. If we can do 60, the pipeline that I was working with was a 60 frame pipeline. So I was like, give it to us in 60 or 30 if you don't have an external hard drive, which you can just plug into which is amazing. And so it was, I just found it to be a little surreal that I was making these requests that were just outrageous, you know, like that I was making this request of someone. And when you look at all the rigs, when you look at what's happening, I think that I think you could shoot scenes where it's a lot more portable than what you would. It's a lot more portable than what you would do otherwise. As I know that, like, when I do training, for instance, I shoot a lot of stuff with everything from Aries to Venices to Blackmagic 12Ks to Blackmagic 6Ks to, you know, I have all these cameras that we shoot with. You know, a lot of my heavier work is done in that realm. My webcams are mostly Sony because of autofocus. I could see where when I switched to training, like, we have this big kit that we send out to people, like C-level, that is got an instruction. 45 minutes it'll take you to set it up. And it's got a video instructions on how to put it together. And this is it's a Blackmagic 6K with a mix pre, and it ties into a Mac Mini, and we can remote control it. And this is how it's as easy to put together as we could make it. When we built that training, I did not shoot it with a 6K camera. I shot it with my iPhone because I can move it to where I need it to be really quickly. I can hand hold it. I can move it up, and I can move it down. I can show you this other angle. I can do all these other things. And so there's a flexibility that I chose to go with to build the training video. And I do that a lot if I want to show you something. And so I think that now you could shoot short films, especially as a filmmaker, maybe not once you have budget, but there's a lot of people, like, the most important thing about filmmaking is to go do it, you know, like, and write a story over a weekend and go shoot it, like a 48-hour film festival, or do those things, like go through the process of shooting it, because the map is never the territory. And you have to go through this pain of just Like I'm going to shoot it. I'm going to live with my mistakes. I'm going to be excited about my successes, and I'm going to cut a film and I'm going to deliver it.
Yeah.
And I think that being able to do that on a phone is pretty powerful. Like and I think that that's the thing that for people starting, and being able to tell a story. You can now tell a story that is easily broadcastable on TV, and definitely for news, that you shot with your iPhone. And it's not going to look any less. It's not going to look any less than the broadcast cameras, which are 1080i.
Well, or I remember
with a 2/3 inch chip.
Seeing the difference when reality TV started switching to good cameras. Because for a long time, I mean, I don't know what they're shooting on, but it was small sensors. The highlights were clipped, and if it was a reality show, it looked bad. That was part of the deal. You know what? I watch over my wife's shoulder when she's watching Netflix right now, and I'm like, that looks pretty good. Like I don't know what they're using, but it's a set of modern Sonys, and it's like, this is basically as good as a movie, just with a different grading and lighting choice. But now that's a really good example of where I think it'll fit in. All of a sudden you need a bunch of pickup shots of the location. Like, you're going to send a really small crew around the city just to get establishing shots. They might do better on the iPhone without having to rig anything up, without having to worry about setting up Ronins or having a bigger team. Like if you send one person with a phone, they might cover more ground and come back with better material than if they had a bigger set.
I had a situation where we stole, we call it stealing shots, right? So we were stealing shots in LA, and which is a hard place to steal shots because they all know what's up. Like you bring a tripod to most cities and they're like, what are they doing? It's so cute. And in LA, they're like, hey, you need a permit for that. And
so underrated is that you don't need a tripod with an iPhone. Like the stabilization is actually amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And we shot a shot where we needed the foreground element we shot in Japan. This is a subject, and he's sitting on the beach. We didn't have the budget, or he didn't have the schedule to fly out. So we're going to shoot him in front of green screen in between a bunch of other shots that we were doing. And we needed a background shot of Santa Monica, of the beach in Santa Monica. So we went to Santa Monica and we pulled out a F23, the old Sony F23, which is a digital film camera. And we take that out on the beach and we set it up and we shoot a background plate that I absolutely could shoot now with an iPhone, and it got, it wasn't the same grading. We had to do all the grading that we'd have to do. But if I shot that with log, on an iPhone, I could have totally done exactly what I did for that shot with that iPhone that I did with it, in the shot that I did there. And that's the kind of those background shots, pickup shots, wide shots, establishing shots, all of those things. Not for a big feature film. We have to, but for small budget films and medium budget films and TV and web, and I think that the other thing we have to look at is when we look at the business of this, the coming market is YouTube.
Yeah.
like,
more people shooting the small and medium budget stuff than there are shooting the big budgets. There's just more of it.
And the thing is that what Apple's giving them is a product that they can shoot that can aspire towards being a big filmmaker, a filmmaker with $80 million budget. Yeah. And they can shoot something that they can actually take into Resolve or Final Cut or Premiere and grade, and grade it and make it look good. And they're not like, well, it's okay. It's, like they actually can do something with it they can be proud of. And I think that's a huge, as we see the next filmmakers building those out. We don't see a ton of narrative on YouTube, but I think that we'll see more and more of it. And I think that the phone is definitely becoming, I think by Apple building a big keynote with it, it also legitimizes all the people who they don't feel small. Yeah. Like they feel like I could, and there's, again, I'm doing a project in a couple of weeks that's all done on Venices. Right. Like I'm not like saying, oh, hey, you know what we should do is an iPhone for this. There's a ton of advantages just having big cameras, so it's not, but there is this huge area of production and of creativity and of communication that is available on the iPhone that is amazing.
Yeah, I think where there is a lot of narrative and just real filmmaking that is always underrated is on TikTok and Instagram, which I don't know if you spend much time watching things there, but I
watch a lot on TikTok. Yeah. I don't spend a lot of time on Instagram. It's mostly I have to admit I've been using TikTok since it was Musical.ly, and I study it in
Yeah,
detail.
I remember those days. I wrote it off at the time though. I couldn't stand it, and I guess
I got brought in to consult for doing some Musically Live activations, and so I got brought in to look at it, and then I was like, "This is a really interesting model." And what I should have done right then is started creating content for it, but I didn't. I just kept on helping people with live activations and working on those things, and then it turned into TikTok, and then I kept on helping people with live stuff and everything else, but I didn't have time. And I made some with my kids. My kids, we made some TikToks. Mostly because I needed somewhere else to experiment, to play with it. And so we made some that are up there. But for the most part, I watch it. What's interesting is watching the trends, watching the trends of what works in TikTok and also what works in Shorts, because Shorts is so different than TikTok because TikTok has a derivative culture that Shorts doesn't have, which I think kind of kneecaps Shorts a little bit. But Shorts has more original content in it than TikTok. But TikTok really still lives in this, which I love. I'm going to take the same audio and do something different with it to tell you my version of that story, which I just think is, from a human research perspective, is so fascinating. Is to replicate that over and over again.
Yeah, I have this feeling. I remember back in the days of Dig and Reddit, that there's sort of this pipeline of idea or memes would come from 4chan to Reddit and then to Dig. And, now it's from TikTok to Instagram to YouTube or something, TikTok is still where the craziest ideas are generated. There's the most experimentation and it's still really the Wild West, and people will just do there's no barrier to entry. There's the least barrier to entry because there's no expectation of image quality or fidelity or you're going to be cool all the time.
Like the ones that I for some reason I find, and they're a little off color, they're a little not safe for work, but the Jason Banks stuff is so funny. I don't know if you watch any of the Jason Banks stuff, but it's so funny. It's a comedian and he does this thing where he's got a wide face and he's got but everyone just uses his audio, and there's all these people voicing the audio and they're just acting along with it. And I don't know why I think it's so funny, but I just find it to be hilarious that they're doing, these men and women, mostly women are doing it, they do these funny ones to the thing, but it's a really funny, and he does all these skits about this really inappropriate kid who's 9 or 10 years old that just says the worst things. Anyway, so, but it's but those are the kind of things that, I think that a level of production that can be done, now with the iPhone is dramatically changing a lot of these things. Because even for when I did TikToks, of course, when I was doing TikToks with my kids, of course, I didn't do it with an iPhone for the most part. I did it with
a Venice
Blackmagic 6K, and so I had this, the way I did one with that, have you ever thought about killing me? Like that, there was that meme, like, oh yeah. So I made this one, but of course I mounted the iPhone over top of the phone so they could hear it. And I could, see what I was shooting, and then I shot all the close-ups and did all the wides, and then I cut a 9:16 for TikTok and put the 16:9 on the, on YouTube, and so I didn't do it quite that way, and now I could probably do that more easily with an iPhone.
Yeah, well, and I just think we need to get past this idea that TikTok or Instagram is somehow not professional. A lot of people are doing it casually, but a lot of people watch it too. There's a lot of serious stuff to be created there. So.
Well, a lot of creators are making a lot of money. Yeah. We have to realize, they're not, some of these creators have tens and sometimes hundreds of employees.
I kind of had my eyes open to recently. My wife sent me an article that was, I don't know, something pretty, I think it was Washington Post talking about the creator economy is bigger than you think. There's more people making more money than you realize. And this is something I've been in the creator economy for years now, but it really kind of drove home, wait a minute. Nobody does know how much money is out there in the independent flow of creator economics, because none of it is tracked anywhere. It's in terms of direct advertising, right? When I do sponsorships on my channel, for example, it's not part of a platform that can, create some bigger trend report that the Washington Post would have any visibility to. And most people are in that situation.
Most creators. And the other thing is most creators don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So they don't want, because it creates separation between them and their audience. And so they, most of them will never talk about, I I don't know if I know any creators that really talk about the numbers,
There's a
of
niche
what
of
they're
creators
making.
that just talk about numbers. That's definitely a thing out there. But
Right. There
yeah,
is that niche, but most of the ones that you see that are really doing well, I mean, they may be giving away. I mean, Mr. Beast gives away a lot of money, and there's other people that are obviously making money at this thing, but a lot of them aren't talking about the actual numbers of how much they're making. And in some cases, it's there's a group of creators, I think, that I know that are making a solid living. Like it's a solid upper middle class. Like they're making 150, 200, 250,000, $300,000 a year just doing this. Like there's some that are just, this is their extra job. Like they're just making a little extra money.
mhm,
Um, the for me, it's a big money hole. Like I just keep putting money into it. I don't actually take any money out.
mhm.
I got to figure out how to reverse that flow. But anyway, but then there's the ones that are making you know, millions of dollars doing this, and they don't talk about that. But when you look at the infrastructure that they have to make this happen, I mean, there's a lot going on. They've got big warehouses of gear and things and people and everything else. That doesn't, as someone who used to run a company, that doesn't come for free.
Right. Yeah. And they're going to be shooting a lot more on iPhones.
I think so. And I think that the other thing that we already saw was that when I was in DC, I was in DC for about 6 months working on my studio there and building it out. And one of the things I worked, so the building that I was in is right where Eurovision and everything else comes into it. CBS is next door. And it's the most connected building in the country. Like there's like 26 dishes on the roof. There's every internet service. There's all the video services all come into this one building. And what's interesting because of that, all of the Eurovision news networks are all on the same floor, or I think the BBC's a couple floors up, but they're all in that building. And so what you get to see out on the street near it are all these press people doing pickup shots, like doing the whatever it is, and they're doing it in Romanian or French or whatever it is, and they're outside and they're doing it. When I first got there, they had lights and they had cameras and they had a producer and they had a camera operator and they had this little stand for their light. And it was very mobile, but you pulled it with a little cart to get to where you needed to go. And then by the end of the time when I left, I kind of closed that up in like 2019. It was one person with an iPhone with a little wireless thing that went to the iPhone, and they were just doing all their pickups by themselves, like just standing them up. And now we can talk about the destruction of broadcast television and everything else. But we're getting to the point where those iPhones were shooting the same footage. You couldn't tell the difference between what they were doing.
Sometimes
the audio
look better.
was a little,
yeah.
From the video perspective, you couldn't tell the difference. The audio is really the challenge, is getting good audio interfaces and getting that stuff in. But
that's also getting
video was
getting better now too. It's getting easier to, we've got 32-bit float on these wireless transceiver receivers, and you really can do not the same, but you can do something competitive with a pretty minimal kit these days too.
Oh yeah, it was something the same that was. I mean, you can have a lab, which you had before, which doesn't sound very good, but it's okay. And then you can plug that into your whatever it is, either your sound devices wireless, or your Deity wireless, or your Zaxcom wireless, whatever, electrosonic. Those are all the things or Sennheiser. Those are the ones that we see a lot of, and it's going to sound the same. And especially if it can record locally, which some of them now can do.
Yeah.
It all depends on whether you're in the United States or not.
Yeah, that patent
Zaxcom has a little patent going on there.
Well, I'm in Canada, so I get the good version. And the nice thing is these companies actually they do build it in. So like the Rode is getting sued for it in the US, but I have the Canadian one that can record internally, and Deity as well. I can record internally, but the US one can't.
I didn't know if the Deity one, I thought that they had made some deal that they could do it in the United States.
Maybe they eventually, on release it didn't. And yeah.
Right. Yeah. Cause like the sound devices wireless stuff is stunning. Like the controls and the quality and everything else and the range. And, but if you buy it outside of the United States, you can it'll record locally.
Yeah.
But if you're in the United States, not so much.
Come to Canada, buy some audio gear.
Yeah, exactly. And then drive across, because it just, all it matters. I mean, they can't say this, but all it matters is you buy it where it needs to be licensed. And then after that, it works everywhere.
Well, so I do want to also talk to you more about photogrammetry, which I think you're the first one I ever heard talking about this, because you've been interested in it for years and actually putting it to use. And I've suddenly found a lot more use for it in the last year, or maybe 2 years at this point, of being able to generate, again, speaking of creating things on your phone, create pretty realistic 3D environments with zero effort or understanding Specifically, I'm using the app Luma AI for pretty much all of this. But what changed in that period? Like, what got so much easier and better about the fidelity when we switched from between those technologies, and how is it different from photogrammetry?
Well, the photogrammetry has grown, so when we first started doing it, I mean, I have I've been doing this for 30 years now. I can't believe I've been doing photogrammetry for almost 30 years. I mean, maybe a couple years short. When we first did it, what we would do is we'd get photos, and then you would take a cube typically, and you'd set it in the photo, and you'd use it to match your focal length. So you use you'd be finding vanishing points. So you put a couple cubes in there to find vanishing points in your scene. And then you would start to build models against those. You'd start building cubes around it. So there was nothing automatic. So in the 90s, there was nothing automatic. And then RealViz and a handful of other folks said, well, if you can show me where 8 to 12 points are in each one of these photos that cross over between the photos, I can calculate the camera for you. And I can calculate, and then I can help you put those points in. Once I've calculated that, was RealViz's image modeler. And so then we started doing that, and that was really exciting. And then we had tracking software like Buju and Pixel Farm and all these other companies would have this tracking software, and it was generating all these points because it had to figure out where the camera was and match it. Well, then it was generating all those points, and we were like, hey, why don't we take that and figure that out? Microsoft had Photosynth, which was never a product that was publicly available, but it would use these points to figure out where to put all these photos to kind of give you the sense of a 3D
I remember
experience. And we figured out how to hack it so that we could pull out all those points. Like I just want the points. So we kept on trying to get the points. So what's happened is, and then we had Metasynth and Reality Engine, which is Reality Engine, Reality Capture. There's so many realities, that's the problem. So anyways, we had a Meta. So the Metashape, really started to be the first one where we can take a bunch of photos and we can throw it in there, and it's going to find all the 2D points that are there. It's going to relate them to each other. It's going to figure out where those cameras are. It's going to figure out where all that whole surface is, and build a surface and throw a texture into it and make it all work. And so that's happened very slowly, but Metashape, really was part of that. And again, Reality Capture, which was bought by Epic, is another version of that. And one of the things that they started to do then is be able to convert these to LiDAR. So now we can take the LiDAR data. And when we started doing that, that was really, we were taking real LiDAR camera. I mean, I don't mean real. I mean, the LiDAR on the phone is real, but it's not
the camera.
The LiDAR on the phone captures thousands of points or hundreds of thousands of points. The ones that we use in production capture a million points a second, right. To go out there and grab onto those for a little bit more range too. They'll go a couple 100 feet or 100 feet, not 30 feet, And so anyway, but as that happened, as you started to mix, so what we tend to call the photos unstructured light and the LiDAR structured light, because we know exactly what the distance is. And but when you mix the structured light acts as a skeleton that you can wrap, that creates a known truth for the unstructured light, which is the photos, to be accurate, because the photos are always going to be more detailed because they're only limited by the resolution of your camera. Right. And so anyway, so you have this mixture of those going on, and then the real magic, which is going to keep on getting better and keep on and we're seeing more and more of this, is when you take a phone, the issue is you have the structured light, the LiDAR that's on the phone, but you also have a camera. And the most important thing is it's a camera that is known to the camera. Mm-hmm. So we know that this is a 24 millimeter, image. We know exactly what the camera and lens is and exactly what the sensor is and everything else. That saves us a whole bunch of time, right. And if you add the LiDAR to it, it now can just grab onto all this imagery really quickly, and it has a fairly good idea of where all the bits and pieces are. So, you have things like, I use a lot of Polycam, to wave around, and you can kind of build these 3D models very, very fast that are very accurate. When I'm trying to figure something out, like I said before, my daughter was playing at a venue. I was in the venue, and we were there early because she was able, they were rehearsing and so on and so forth. The place was empty, and I was like, you know what I'm going to do right now? I'm just going to wander around and build a 3D model of it, because someday I might need to figure out where to do that all the time. Yeah. And I just was waiting. And of course, my daughter's friends were like, your dad is taking pictures of the wall. like I'm going up and down the wall like this.
I've been that guy.
Just capturing all the data. They were like, he's so strange. And that did not go over well. But anyway, but then I have a 3D model of it. And when I measure the height of the stage and I measure the other things, it's all accurate.
Right.
I mean, plus or minus an inch, and really it's more the accuracy that I can select it more than anything else. And so that's really changed. And that's going to keep on getting better. And it feeds into what Apple's doing with photogrammetry, with the Vision Pro and even with just the phone. Like that venue that I captured the other day, I could text it to you. And when you open it, if you open it outside or in a parking lot, it's the same size as it was when I shot it.
You can walk
you can
into it
walk around with your phone.
Yeah,
it's amazing. If it's in your apartment, your apartment will intersect with it, and it's very confusing.
Yeah, that's going to get really interesting once you can view them in a Vision Pro. I mean, it's going to totally change how much people have sort of dismissed this as like just a quirky, side project for certain people, but all of a sudden people will be able to kind of experience the results of it in a very different way.
Well, and I think that the other thing is that photogrammetry, like the number one use I use for photogrammetry is 3D printing. I'm not printing the object that I scan.
Mm-hmm.
I do photogrammetry of a lot of the objects on my desk so that I have an accurate 3D model so that I can model things to hold them or model little things on them.
Accessories for them.
Yeah, like there was a friend of mine had a pipe that had been mangled, got hit by a lawnmower, and they needed a new one. And so I waved over it and I got the 3D model and I went to the hardware store and I showed it to them. They're like, I can't quite tell how big it is. And I hit it so that it would just sit on the desk in front of them.
It's that big.
And they could rotate it around. They go, oh, I know exactly what that is. Here's what you need. And they went and got it because they understood it. And that's where we're going to start to get to where we can do that. Mm-hmm. We can, I was at, another place that really kind of opened my eyes around that was I was at Hallmark Cards. We were doing a show at Hallmark Cards, like behind the scenes. I know you don't think that Hallmark Cards would have engineering, but they do, because they have all these weird cards that when you open them, they make a noise.
Sure.
That's super hard. Like, it turns out that is like, you have 3 pennies per item to use, and it has to work every single time.
Yeah.
And that is crazy difficult. And so they've got this engineering team that's building these ideas, and they've got printers and laser cutters and everything else. And I was talking to one of the guys and he was like, oh, I just print my, I was asking what he's printing, thinking it was something for the card. He's like, no, I got a pipe that I got to fit in and I'm just printing it for home. And it would have been printing all night. And so those are the kind of things we're going to constantly be looking at. And the last thing I'll say about that is, if you don't think photogrammetry matters, go to Amazon, pick out a shelf, just go to a shelf or something in your house on your phone and see how often it'll pop up and say, would you like to see this in your room?
Oh, Amazon has that? I never see that on Amazon.
All the time. I use it. Like, I won't even buy something like a shelf or a chair or anything else from Amazon if I don't see that, because I click on it and it just pops up it says where, you see these little dots appear to show you where the floor is, and you hit it and it just puts that thing to scale in your house and you can look at it. And it's one of the most future feeling things, like it feels like the future when you can just put the object in there. You can rotate it around next to your couch. I had a chair. We were like rotating it around and figuring out if it sits right next to the thing, what is it going to look like? And it does a really good job. Yeah. So,
yeah, the use case I've kind of actually going back a minute, when you started saying how long you've been doing this, it gave me an idea for a YouTube video that I wonder if I could generate these with film. Like, if I could take a disposable camera and plug the photos in. How well
when we started, that's what we did.
And it was working?
Could I
use like the modern automated software without knowing how to draw the cubes and stuff, and it would actually...
Yeah, you could do... because it's...
I want to try that.
You could take pictures with film, and then you scan the film, and then you put it in there, and the only tricky part is you'd have to use a real film scanner, and you really have to get it, the full aperture of it there, because if that changes at all, it will screw up the system. That's the only tricky part of it. It would be very hard to do it, but... Well, I did spherical stuff with film all the time.
Because the thing that excites me about it is the filmmaking side. I mean, personally for me, because I can't work in 3D. I just don't know how. It's not a skill set I have. But being able to use the new formats out there, I can generate a 3D scan of my room. Or what I haven't used yet, but I'd like to more, is doing it with drone shots, where you just record 4K video circling around an area. And instead of trying some death-defying FPV moves where you're, potentially crashing, flying under an arch or something, you just scan the area, get, full quality, and then regenerate the move in 3D later without having a 3D skill set. I don't need to learn a new skill. I can just start scanning rooms and spaces and creating moves that I couldn't have otherwise. And we're even the points that we're getting to with tracking plugins as well, that they're just becoming more pervasive, even things on the phone, plugins for Final Cut Pro. There's just so many more ways to track a space and insert objects into it. So I'm suddenly finding like, oh, I don't need to go learn all these things, but I can start working with 3D objects and 3D environments and actually using them in 2D work. And that's actually even something I'm curious. I'm like thinking about for the Vision Pro as well, is like, it might also be an interesting tool for generating 2D work, which I still think will consume more of that in total. But all of these 3D tools become most interesting when you can flatten them down to conventional video, but it just looks really cool.
Well, and I think that there's also for those, there's a lot when we're thinking about 3D, like a lot of what I've done over the last couple of years is to really focus on, like for the last 10 years, we go in and we used to take lots of photos, and we'd hand them to somebody and they'd model out the set. And that's just us doing previs.
Yeah.
So now we figure out so we had models for a long time for Pixel Core, we had models of everything we used. So we had the cameras, the tripods, the lights, everything else. And we put them all in, and we'd figure out if they were going to fit into that room that we thought we were going to do and exactly where we're going to put them. But B, we could show it to the client. Like, this is what it's going to look like. This is what's going to happen. And then I could also send it to the crew. Let's say we did one in London for this Aesop, I think, ASOS. Anyway, so they do
the soap,
kids clothing.
Oh, okay.
Aesop.
ASOS
anyway,
does clothes, yeah.
ASOS, I think it's, anyway, and so we sent it to the crew so that before I got there, they knew where I wanted all the lights, I all those things. And in the other ways, we'll take models of a location and we'll put all of our gear in, and we'll show it to the client, or the stage, right? The stage and the lighting and everything else, and let the client sit in there and put the headset on. We would let them, at the time it was Oculus, put the Oculus and look around and say, oh yeah, this feels right. This feels like what I want it to look like. And that saves us so much time, to be able to make some of those decisions. Because some of it you just have to, it's really hard to understand when you look at a overhead shot or a 3D render of what it's going to feel like when you're actually standing in it. And I think we're getting past that right now.
Yeah, I think it's all really cool. Is there anything you see coming, like trying to predict the next year or two? Like what production trends do you see trickling out to being more commonly used, or are you excited about?
Well, the Stereo 180 is going to be, there's a space race coming, between Apple and Meta, that we're about to see billions of dollars being spent, in this thing, because Meta is trying to hang on to what, the leadership position they got themselves into, and Apple's coming in, heavy. And so I think that you're going to see a huge push towards, and I don't know where this is all going to end up, but I can tell you in the next year and a half, year and a half or 2 years, I would at least think about Stereo 180. 360 is a little complicated because it's really hard to shoot 360. I've done a lot of 360, and it's really hard to shoot 360 well because you got to hide all the stuff and all the gear and everything else. And also, does it really matter if you see behind it?
Right.
It's easier to tell a story and let people watch sports and everything else in the 180 view. And that way you're not having to figure out what to fill with the back end.
Yeah, I've always found that 360 storytelling, like if you're wearing a Quest and watching, they have narratives that are created within VR. That experience of when you need to turn your head all the way around to see something that flew by is like not ideal and not necessary.
Definitely not when traditional filmmakers do it. Like, we really found that was limiting. Is filmmakers want to do this thing where they're going to give you a sound that's going to get you to, they want it to still be old. They were like, basically, new wine and old wineskins kind of approach to things, which is that they want to do traditional filmmaking inside of a 360 environment, which was a mistake. What we did, I don't know if we did it right, but what we really focused on was this idea that I'm going to tell you a story that's very short, but you can explore that story for a while. So we've done things where there's 5 or 6 things going on and they're interrelated, and you see them all happening. I'm telling you that story, but you might want to watch that loop for a little bit because it's because this is happening over here, and you're exploring the story and seeing how it happens over time. So you might watch something for half an hour that might only be 3 minutes long,
right?
Because you're pulling in all the what happened here, and why did that person do this, and why did this do this, or it's just an experience. We did one with a a runway, where you see the runway models changing behind something, but you see them getting made up, you see them, coming off screen, you see them going down the side, and you can watch all the things that were happening in the runway kind of exposed to you, but the runway is just one little part of it, but you're standing in the middle of all the things that are happening. And that was a really, I felt like that was fun to watch, as opposed to trying to follow along with someone trying to tell a story, which didn't usually turn out.
Right. Yeah. Well, whatever it is, it's going to be extremely exciting. And I know you're going to be on top of it and ahead of it. So thanks again for coming on, Alex. If anybody isn't watching Office Hours, you do it how often? Basically every day is what it seems like.
Every day. We haven't missed a single day, including weekends and holidays, since March 25th, 2020.
Wow.
So
amazing.
We've answered now 55,000 questions.
Wow. That's actually really amazing.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's a number that just kind of sneaks up on you.
And where should people check it out?
They can go to officehours.global. You can if you sign up there, you go to join, you'll get an email every day that tells you what we're talking about that day. Or you can just go to Office Hours Global on YouTube and see the actual video.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for coming, Alex.